Thank you. There are various options available for inadequate landing zones, and Dr. Bedi has just talked about the first one there, the snorkel or the chimney technique, but there are several others which I'll allude to. One is called back table fenestrations. We call them on-site fenestrations, and then we have custom fenestrated device, and then we have the newer off-the-shelf devices that are coming in. So custom fenestrated grafts for abdominal aortic aneurysms have been around for some time, and more than 6,000 procedures have been performed worldwide. And you could either have a scallop, which is right on top of the device, like this one here, or you could have a fenestration. And these are custom made according to the patient's anatomy, and like Dr. Bedi said, it takes maybe a couple of months to procure them, and more importantly for us in India, they're extremely expensive, probably 3 to 4 times the cost of a standard aortic stent graft. But these have done well. We have intermediate term results now. The 30-day mortality in collection of series reviewed recently was less than 3%. The visceral perfusion rates through these fenestrations is more than 98%, and a 2-year follow-up. These visceral vessels have been patent 93 to 97% of the time, and there has been a fairly significant reintervention rate of about 10 to 16%. But they do have problems. One is that it can be technically difficult to cannulate these fenestrations. You need to do very detailed planning, and you need high quality angiography, and even so it can be difficult. And like we said earlier, it takes some time to manufacture these devices, and we have a fairly high secondary intervention rates, especially in relation to the renals, where the covered stent going into the renal could be crushed, may require some further interventions. So to overcome these, some of these problems, to be specific, 2 of these problems, delay and cost, we have on-site fenestration. And we've been doing that now for a year and a half. We have made our own fenestrator, which we heat over a flame, hold it onto the device at the precise spot you want a fenestration, and then we strengthen the edge of the fenestration with coronary guide wire, a nitinol, and that's an example down there of actually a thoracic Cook Zenith device. And we've studied these fenestrations that we make. They're pretty clean cut, sharp edged devices, fenestrations, and you get almost exactly the size you want. They're almost always perfectly circular, and if you balloon them right down at the bottom, you can see what happens if you use a balloon that's more than twice the size of a balloon of the fenestration. The graft doesn't tear, it just stretches and recoils quite a bit, but you don't get badly frayed edges. And on top of that, we actually strengthen the edges with that wire I told you. So we do get good sealing with these fenestrations when you put covered stents in them. Here's an example of a graft that we've fenestrated. We put up the schedule of how we want to fenestrate on the wall, and then we work in a sterile environment, make the fenestration, then resheath the device. We use basically umbilical tape wound around the device as we resheath it, and then we do the case. So here's the first case we did, actually, a thoracoabdominal aneurysm in a patient with Takayasu arthritis. The aneurysm ended at the renal arteries. Smaller aneurysm below that, which we chose to ignore. This is the pre-operative angiogram in January of last year. You can see the aneurysm coming down to the renals. And then we deploy the device with 4 fenestrations for the 4 visceral arteries, and then we cannulate them, get sheets through them into the respective branches, bring covered stents in, and at that stage we completely open the aortic stent graft, and then we deploy the covered stents, and this is the completion angiogram showing no endo leak, and this is the follow-up CT angiogram again showing no endo leak, and you can see all the visceral arteries continuing to be perfused, and with the covered stents in each of them. This is another patient with infrarenal aortic aneurysm who had an aberrant right lower renal artery rising very close to the sac of the aneurysm, and the regular two renal arteries are way up there. So there's a very good neck, except for this renal artery that's quite sizable that came in the way. So we used a Cook AAA device with a single fenestration located down there, through which we preserved the flow into that aberrant right renal artery. And this is the follow-up CT angiogram showing how that lower aberrant renal artery continues to perfuse and exclusion of the AAA. Here's another case with kind of a conical neck, which we did with Dr. Krishnan, who will be presenting this in more detail later. And we used two fenestrations with an endurance graft for the two renal arteries. And that's the image on the right showing the completion angiogram. And these are the follow-up CT angiograms at 1 month and at 1 year, which show preserved flow into the renals and exclusion of the aneurysm with thrombosis of the sac of the aneurysm. So last year there was an article in the Journal of Vascular Surgery which reviewed a series of what we call physician-modified endografts, PMEGs. And this is from Stans and group, and they had 82 fenestrations for juxta-renal abdominal aortic aneurysms, and these fenestrations were distributed mainly for the renals, some celiac and SMAs. And the mean follow-up was almost 2 years, and the average amount of contrast they used was 98 ml for these procedures, fluoro time 48 minutes, technical success 98%, and freedom from aneurysm-related death by the time of the follow-up was 98%. 13% complications and also 13% endoleaks. And the in-hospital and 30-day mortality was a very encouraging 2%. So I think this is a technology that is very relevant to the third world. And if we learn how to do this well, it could be an option for patients who don't have good landing zones for their stent grafts. Just a word or two about what's coming up. We have off-the-shelf devices coming out, and these off-the-shelf devices are based on the fact that there is a kind of a pattern in which these visceral arteries take off from the aorta. The celiac and the SMA take off between 11 and 1 o'clock. The right renal is between 9 and 11, and the left renal is between 1 and 4. In up to 85% of patients, you see that pattern. So you could have a device which would fit a large number of patients who have fairly standard anatomy, and this could be off the shelf. And then there's this Ventana fenestrated system that's been, some very encouraging results have been coming out, where its stability is basically provided by the way it sits on the aortic bifurcation. And then you can have a system by which the sealing zone is moved up from the traditional infrarenal to the infra-SMA region. And by that, you improve the sealing a lot. And this way, the juxta-renal aneurysms can be effectively treated. And there's also work going on pre-cannulated renal fenestrations, where you can very easily enter the renal arteries through a fenestrated device, and that would save operative time, fluoroscopy exposure, and contrast usage, and this may be one of the ways in the future. And then we have the P branch device from Cook that's coming up, where the fenestration is actually within a larger zone, and you can actually move it around a little bit so that it can adjust to a range of locations of the side branch. And this one size could fit several anatomic variations. So all these are in the pipeline. There are studies coming out in all of these, and I'm sure these will make a mark in the future. Thank you.
Is there a difference in making fenestration between different grafts, the Cooks, Gore, and
Yeah, we have only made fenestrations for the Cook and the Medtronic stent grafts, both thoracic and abdominal aortic. They're both Dacron grafts, and the one feature about them that's important is that there is space between the struts, stent struts. So we don't make fenestrations over a strut. It has to be between the struts. So if you look at the Go device, there's hardly any space between the stent struts. So you cannot but make it over a stent strut, and that would make it difficult to cannulate, put in a covered stent. And also, we don't know how to resheath a Go device once you open it on the table. But we figured out how to resheath a Cook device and a Medtronic device, both thoracic and abdominal aortic. So for these two reasons, we've confined ourselves to these two systems, Cook and Medtronic. But the literature has been almost all on Cook devices. I haven't seen any reports on on-site fenestration of Medtronic stent grafts.
One other thing, if you're going to do this, most of the people mark the fenestration that they make. If you're doing a homemade device, most people mark the fenestration with the gold snare, the piece of gold, the gold part of the snare, because you have to have something that's very radio opaque so you can see it under fluoro. And these people, many of them are fat, so you really want something that shines easily. When you go to sew that on to the fabric, you need to sew it on with a braided suture and not a monofilament suture. Because when you reload them back into the device, if you've made 2 or 3 fenestrations and you've marked them, one of them will come off, and then you'll spend a lot of time trying to find that hole in the graft to hook it up to a vessel when you get in there. These are things that when you go and watch other people do it, they don't write about it in their publications because it is modifying a graft off-label, and there's some legal issues with that. But I will tell you, if you're going to sew the little gold markers on, make sure you sew them on with braided suture, because the monofilament will come off when you go to reload it. It'll cut into it.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah.
I didn't see you. Back there? Okay, I've got this glare. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Now, you showed the angle in a fenestration when you do self-reconstruction of fenestration. But you showed only 2-dimensional angle, but there should be 3-dimensional angle.
Yes, there is 2 measurements that are required. One is where is the location of the fenestration with respect to the top of the graft, and the second is what o'clock that fenestration has to be. The renals are typically 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, and the SMA, celiac are 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. And then there's another thing to think about. If you have these Cook endografts which you constrain from behind, then the graft kind of becomes asymmetric, and then the fenestrations don't, when you open them in the patient, the fenestrations don't point 3 and 9 o'clock. They will become like 4 and 8 o'clock, you know. So you've got to adjust for that when you are working in the patient. Whereas if you have circumferential constraining of the device, which we do with the chromic catgut, 5-0 chromic catgut, then the angles don't change. And then once we deployed the graft and we've cannulated the fenestration, we go in with a balloon and break these sutures. And then chromic catgut breaks fairly easily. So we use that for the Medtronic grafts, there's this runner wire system which Odrick described for the Cook device. You can't do that for the Medtronic. So we're using 5-0 chromic catgut for that.
And Cook is making this off-the-shelf fenestrated products, which is applicable for about 70% of the patients.
Yes.
So you need to make it.
Well, if it comes and it works, I think that may be a simpler way to go, and the cost would also be an issue. But if it's reasonably priced, I think nobody's want to take all this trouble of making fenestrations and resheathing devices.
Just a couple of points which I can just make, Dr. George. One is that the major advantage of the Cook device is that there are fixed 12 struts, whatever size of the device that you use. There are always 12 struts. So when you're doing your marking and all, you can take one particular one as the 12 o'clock position, and that doesn't really change. 12, 3, 6, and 9, it becomes relatively easier to mark with a Cook device, which is there. The
Yes.
second thing, basically, just another thing which has come out recently is that the off-the-shelf, the devices that we make out here, we don't have a nitinol ring in that. So that is the weak point because what we use is a coronary wire. Whereas the prefabricated ones, which the cook has got basically, there you have a nitinol ring, so that provides a better support out there when you're putting in a fenestrating device.
There is a downside to that as well, that if it's a nitinol closed ring, you can't make it any bigger. Whereas we have this wire which is just basically looped back on itself. You can stretch it to a much bigger diameter if you want. So that flexibility is not there with a nitinol wire. Thank you.